I'm going to try something that I don't normally do, and I'm going to work in oil paints, and I'm going to try and do an Alla Prima painting. I'm going to try and do it very quickly in one sitting, and yeah, well, see how it goes. I'm starting by just blocking out a quick sketch with some yellow ochre paint. I have blocked in and sketched out an outline for what I'm drawing, but I've kept it quite simple. If you're trying to complete a painting Alla Prima style in one sitting, then you don't want that underdrawing to be too complicated, so keep it simple. Just the big basic shapes. So for this one, I'm using a burnt umber, burnt sienna, a yellow ochre, golden yellow, some Naples yellow, some white, sap green, some cadmium red, and then a little bit of a Prussian blue, if I can get it out of the tube. There we go, a little bit of that Prussian blue. Look how bright and vibrant those saturated colours. Look at that red. You just don't get that vibrancy with acrylic paints. Like oil paints, even the cheaper oil paints, they are so much more vibrant. They feel so much more pigmented and colourful than acrylic paints, even the expensive acrylic paints. For this piece, I'm starting with the background. Because I'm working in oils, I want something already down in the background to blend the edges of the subject into. I'm just being quite rough and abstract with my marks. I want this piece to be dynamic and have a lot of movement in the background and the subject. Once the background's in, I can move on to the lion. I started by blocking in the colours, and it did actually take me a while to get into the process of painting this. I eventually realised that instead of using small brushes, I needed to use a much bigger brush and just focus on the average colours of an area rather than trying to get all the details in. I usually paint details, so it was hard getting that idea of I don't have to actually paint all of the individual hairs from my brain to my hand. So yeah, I guess that's one of the first things I learned painting Alla Prima, is bigger brushes and focus on the biggest shapes possible at the start. For the first couple of hours of this piece, this sort of blocking stage, I'm keeping all the colours and values in the mid-tone range, nothing too dark and nothing too light. I also wanted to include some of the green of the background into the main subject, so I started to add some of the green to the shadows of the lion. This just helps tie the two together and just makes the subject and the background feel a little bit more connected. There's two things that I wish I'd done at the start of this painting process that would have made it so much easier, and both of those involve my palette. So first of all, the palette that I was using was absolutely tiny. It was not sufficient for a painting of this size. What I noticed was the colours started getting muddy and I didn't really have enough space to mix the colours that I needed. The second thing that I wish I'd done was mix my colours right at the very start. It just would have made it so much easier if I'd had all the colours that I needed ready there on my palette, so I could just pick them up, put them onto the canvas, rather than having to mix up a new colour every time. On to the next step now, which is rendering. I'm starting to fill in some of the details, but I'm not thinking about the fur or the hairs at all for this piece, as I want it semi-abstract looking. I do find it very difficult to loosen up with my paintings, but it is something that I'm working on trying to do more. Because of the style that I'm aiming for, I can be slightly more abstract with my brushstrokes and focus more on mark making. I found the rendering process quite difficult at first, as my brushwork was getting muddy and the first layers of paint were being scraped off. I quickly realised why this was. My normal painting technique with acrylics involves layering thin washes of paint. I tend to scrub my brush into the canvas, and the paint is much thinner, so it flows more easily. But with this painting, with the oils, the scrubbing didn't work. It just scraped the paint off the canvas. So I needed to change my technique. I made sure that there is enough paint on the brush. If there's too little, it scrapes off paint from the canvas and it just creates a muddy mess. Second, Instead of scrubbing the paint into the canvas, you need to be more gentle and place the paint onto the surface. I'd describe it more as spreading the paint rather than brushing. You're trying to leave that underlayer intact, but still being able to add fresh paint on top that doesn't necessarily pick up the colour underneath and can be layered by itself. I realised that you have to be much more methodical painting like this. I felt the more I rushed, the muddier the painting became, and I had to keep telling myself to slow down, get fresh paint after each brushstroke, and take my time placing each block of colour on the canvas. I think with Alla Prima paintings, having a focal point is absolutely essential. I mean, it is for most paintings as well, but more so with the Alla Prima. It impacts the brushstrokes that you use. Your focal points, so in my case the face, was more detailed. I used smaller brushes and rendered things like the nose, the teeth and the eyes in much more detail than the rest of the face. Then the mane and the background can afford to be a little bit more abstract, blend together and have some softer edges. I do find this technique so much faster than painting with acrylics, mainly because the oils are more opaque, you can put down solid blocks of colour much faster than with acrylics, and you can also blend those colours more easily. This is definitely a technique that I will be trying again. I absolutely loved the process and I had so much fun creating a painting like this. I hope you found the tips that I've picked up in my experience of doing this helpful and you try to give it a go yourself. And if you already paint Alla Prima, as I said, this is the first time I've done it. If you've got any tips to share, please do leave them in the comments. That would be absolutely amazing. So the only thing left to do now is show you the finished painting. If you like this painting, you can purchase it as a limited edition print through my website, studiowildlife.com. I'll leave a link in the description for you. This video wasn't my first time using oils. If you would like to see how I go about using oil paints to create a more realistic painting, then please check out this video here. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.